Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11, and I'm going to cough here. Excuse me. And of course, we're playing as Japan, and so we're going to continue this now. In case you're sort of new here, and I welcome everybody, new friends, old friends, people who hate me but still want to watch. I do things a little different than a lot of YouTubers who play games, and I noticed, and it was commented on in the last episode, that I'm talking a lot and not playing much, and there's definitely a balance issue there. That I need to balance that, because we do need to gameplay. But part of what I do is talk a lot while playing, and sometimes I get going more with the talking and need to stop and pause the game. And I think it's important too. And yes, I could just play and just tell you just sort of what I'm doing and not talk about other things, but then how would I be different from a lot of other really great YouTubers out who do this type of thing? And I do mean there are a lot of great ones, so sort of how I'm trying to be different. Okay, heavy cruiser armor has advanced. Heavy cruiser armor 1939, we're going to stop that. Twin engine airframe research has advanced, and yes, let's click over to that, get those guys up, twin engines. I figured also medium fuel tank. And artillery barrel and ammunition has advanced. Okay, that leaves us with a couple of extra slots, and I'm being very conscious of year dates for this kind of stuff. Okay, anti-aircraft, that's a worthy thing. And again, if you know me from being around for a while, infrastructural type things like this are sort of what I want to do first, especially things that can affect us now. Yeah, reduces manpower here, but boy, a bonus to ICs and efficiency and those kind of things. Might as well get them early, get them structurally in place, and we can worry about, you know, tactics and machine guns when sort of appropriate. Fire control system. Again, I'm looking for, trying to have a good basic twin engine bomb bay. Yeah, let's do that. And yes, doing some of this is sort of boring and slow. Okay, armored fighting vehicles, tracks, and suspension has advanced. If you look at a lot of Japanese tanks, especially, well, keep saying, you know, pre-war, pre-what war, and a lot of the stuff that they're still featuring and readily using look like they're, you know, World War I type suspensions and elements to it. Yeah, we're gonna let that continue. I have a very conflicting, mentioning that, view of Japanese armor. Again, if you may know, I really like tanks and watch some of my War Thunder videos. But the Japanese tanks, again, I have this. One, I see them as very backward and very poor equipment, you know, in design. And it's in design features as in, you know, how many man turrets, you know, the traction suspension type systems. They look like they're off of sort of like an enlarged version of an FT-17 or something like that, and stuff that you may be sort of seeing in the, you know, early 20s or some such stuff. There we go. And yeah, we could do civil defense. And so, you know, when I look at that, and then if you, there's like one photo on from like Tarawa or one of the places, one of the islands that the Americans took over. There's a picture of this Sherman, and on the back of the Sherman there's this Japanese tank that they had captured. Probably it looks sort of destroyed, but you know they're going to take it back as a trophy, you know, kind of thing. And so this, you know, the tank sits on the back deck of a Sherman, you know, so size comparison, and you can also see again structural comparison. And so I see this really sort of backward and very limited thing. But then you sort of also have to look at it. Well, what were they doing with these vehicles? They were fighting the Chinese, who, other than I don't know if the Soviets gave them any. I know that the Germans sold them some Panzer I, so those just have machine guns on them, and those were all, I believe, lost fighting sort of to the approaches of Nanjing here. But you know, so you're fighting the Chinese, you're fighting whoever, you're fighting up in Manchukuo, and you're fighting down in Burma and Indonesia, where you have very limited bridges. You want to be able to construct it. You want to have your engineering group to construct a bridge, you know, because the enemy may blow it up or something. Quickly out of local timbers, and so something heavy like a Sherman would take a lot more building than to build some of these other things. So, but if they had gone against the Soviets, and I have a few pictures, I don't know if we'll have a chance to use them for thumbnails of the Soviets examining knocked out Japanese tanks and equipment. And so yeah, if you were going to be fighting even the sort of T-26s and BT-5s and BT-7s, those vehicles are so much better than the Japanese vehicles. So the Japanese do knock a few out. I have a picture of some Japanese soldiers, you know, sort of doing the bonsai arms up thing on top of a couple of knocked out. Couldn't quite tell whether they're BT-5s or BT-7s. So, you know, yeah, you can knock them out. And those things, you know, a decent field gun, which is different than a big proper howitzer, but the Japanese had a lot of field gun type things. We could get into some of them, what a sort of a field gun type use. But a field gun, which is basically, you know, shooting a high explosive shell, either timed for air burst or impact fused. You impact fused on a you know, fairly light armor like a lot of the Soviet armor was, you're going to blow through it. You know, it doesn't take an armor penetrating round to get through that stuff. That's fairly light. Okay, heavy cruiser engines. 1939. So now we haven't gotten the armament because that was delayed by the treaty. But we'll get that. So we'll have better armor for our better setup for our cruisers. That we're going to build some, very likely. Capital ship main armament. Well, we're not yet to third. Well, yeah, that's something. You know, talk about infrastructure and that type of thing. But we have a situation where naval. Oh, gotta unpause it. Naval builds take a long time to do. And something like the main armament doesn't upgrade unless you send it back to the production line. See here, you can upgrade this to a destroyer. Well, it already is a destroyer, but what it will do is if you put it back through, it'll be cheaper than building a new one, and it will come out after the end of its process at the sort of latest capabilities at the time that you start the upgrade process. So if you were to look at this, and some of these things upgrade, but you could look at some of the I don't know, not the depth charge models, but like small ship main armament model 1939. So that's already, you know, well in advance. So doing it now, small ship crew berth, armor belt. I'd have to, engine. I'd have to look to see what turbine engine thingy that represents. But right now, it wouldn't profit us to send it through. But in say 1944, if we've continued to do research and upgrade, and we have a free ICs, and we want to upgrade outdated, destroyers, maybe not, but outdated. Older ships, we might want to do that. I rarely do, but it's quite possible. And one of the nations that was doing a fair amount of this leading up to the war, and was sort of stuck finishing some of it, was Italy. Japan also did more conversions, I think. They converted a few things to like aircraft carriers or float plane tenders and that kind of stuff. Range finding equipment has advanced. Very good. Knowing the range of the enemy is very useful for firing artillery at them. I'm willing to do that too, but just sort of hesitating. As I'm sort of reading and playing this and thinking about things, I'm really sort of, and of course Man in the High Castle season 3 is coming out in a little less than 2 months from now, thinking, how could Japan have won? What could they have done to win? And the more I read and look at it and see the scale of things in our real sort of world, there is just almost no way they could win. It just, they take out, this is, basically these are Okinawa, I guess. Isn't that right? Yeah. This is Iwo Jima, yeah, Okinawa here. And, the U.S. has lots of casualties from suicidal Japanese, kamikazes. And I can't imagine, even if somehow they make the war too painful for the Americans at some point, that would somehow constitute a Japanese win. I just can't imagine it. The only sort of, in my opinion, realistic thing is for Germany to win early in 1941 against the Soviets, and then be able to push into the Indian Ocean and to some degree make the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor unnecessary, but does go to war with the Western Allies, which may bring the U.S. into it, but it brings it in without the wrath. Like you bombed our harbor before declaring war, kind of thing. That really pissed off the American people. Really did. And then have a very strong functioning Germany that that's the only way I can see based on what was going on at the time. Now, short of that, not so much something that is dependent upon somebody else doing something. Okay, yeah, grand battle plan. That looks like something we can... Oh, well, we want to do some Great War analysis. Okay. Artillery carriage design. Did we lose? Oh, no. Then we wanted to stop that. Okay, yes. Yeah, we need to do some of this. Figure out what happened in the Great War. You were barely part of it. Think about it. Okay. You know, how could Japan have won and still have been Japan? You know, because you go, oh, well, you know, if they did this, if they did that, if they did these other things, well, yeah, you know, it's like, you know, well, if the Soviet Union had pursued a capitalistic free market economic system, well, that isn't the Soviet Union. That's sort of United Russia, or I don't know, the Russian Federation, or something, you know, a different, very different world. But so I'm going on and thinking about what could they have done. Part of Japan's problem is the world's problem at the time, is the economic depression. Now, there's a lot of tariff trade talks going on. You know, people, well, diplomatically as well as people talking about it in the media. And there's this sort of conventional wisdom amongst at least a lot of the American conservative thinkers, is that free markets are the best, and we want to knock down tariffs and free markets and free markets and free markets. Well, I'm going to go yes, but, and here I go talking about another topic, but it does relate to Japan and what's going on here. Free markets are a good thing, but they're going to cause chaos. And that's the intention of them. The idea is that, the hand knitted sock factory is going to go out of business, and all those people are going to lose their jobs, and next door they're going to open up a factory that makes socks with machines, and they're only going to employ, say, 10% of the people that did there. So there's 90% of those people are out of work. But because socks are so much cheaper out there in the world, people aren't spending, you know, $20 for each sock. They can now get them for, you know, $1 or whatever it is. And so things are cheaper, so then that, oh, well, now we can afford other things, so they can be hired to do other work. And so they'll be out of work for days, weeks, months, but the market comes around, and, you know, it's sort of this chaotic thing. And that is for the best, again, but there's some caveats. It doesn't have to be competing with everywhere else in the world, one, because you can have a global free market, but hey, that's only limited to this planet. What about other planets? You sort of get that idea. So you can have a free market that is limited to a particular region, say the United States of America. There's what is known as the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Well, yeah, but Canada and Mexico still have lots of tariffs on American goods, particularly one thing I know about. I mean, there's other things that I don't know about. But like in Canada, there's lots of tariffs against American milk going north. So when they negotiated NAFTA, and there's a bunch of protectionist tariffs, I know, I just don't know what they are right offhand, for Mexico, it's sort of like, yeah, we knocked down some of those trade barriers, but then you guys get all of, you know, cheaper goods for American people, you know, either made in Canada. There has been a post-war world, several major American-owned car manufacturers that had factories in Canada that made a bunch of cars and shipped them to America. Why would they do that? The Canadian dollar is a softer currency than the American, so you pay the labor in American or in Canadian dollars, and you sell them for American dollars, so you save money. It's cheaper goods for the American people, and cheaper goods are good, but then it does mean jobs go overseas. So there is what is known as autarkies, which is a closed economic system that is sufficient, meaning you don't need to import any critical element. You might say, oh, import Swiss chocolate, but if the Swiss were to get mad at you and stop all Swiss chocolate exports to your country, you go, okay, well, we'll just have American chocolate. It's not the idea of a critical thing, as opposed to, well, if you import 50% of your oil and then somebody decides to cut off your oil, you're not an autarky because you need to use that. So, and I know a few viewers here that have commented on it. They are a bit more protectionist in tendencies. And so you get this situation where the people you're trading with, say like China, has very high tariffs to actually, not just tariffs, but legal things to keep you from importing certain goods. Not necessarily embargoes per se, but just regulations and whatnot that stop the importation of goods that you make in certain sectors, protectionist laws and whatnot. So they're not necessarily doing free trading with us, and you can look at whether it's, again with China, currency manipulations, meaning China very much controls what money you can take out and what the exchange rate are to take your money out of China. In fact, that there has been, sort of through Macau, I think mainly, a situation where you can buy in China a vacation package for, let's say, $100,000 equivalent for a vacation package to Macau. And so you get a really nice hotel room, really set up your meals and all this stuff, and let's say $80,000 worth of gambling chips at a Macau casino. And so you go there, you have your weekend gambling thing, but you don't gamble away that $80,000. You just take it to the Macau cashier bank and get dollars for it. And now you've moved $80,000 out of China. Got around it, and so, but somebody here, in the money is still sort of in China, but it's redistributed, and it's sort of arcane thing to get around currency limitations, and they will set it up at exchange rates that are more realistic to the rest of the world, where say 100,000 RMB or whatever it is in China, the yuan, 100,000 of that, let's say, will get you $10,000 officially. But through this package, that 100,000 will get you $20,000, which is maybe the more realistic. I think I have all this right. Maybe I have it backwards. But the more realistic purchasing power. So they are currency manipulators. So if you have free trade, and if you're not currency manipulating, and if you're truly allowing free trade both ways, then okay, great. Now you still have the problem of actual cost of living in a place like Bangladesh, which has stolen away a lot of like sock manufacturing from from China, because it's actually cheaper to make the socks in Bangladesh. And I'm not just talking euphemistically there. It's really like socks are one of the things they make, and t-shirts and simple, easy to make stuff. The labor is so much cheaper because of the cost of living there, and so you can have the machinery to make the socks either made in China or made in the US or whatever, and shipped to Bangladesh, and open up a factory to make socks, and you'll produce it. So you do still have some of that going on, but that sort of comes back to the creative destruction in that, okay, you'll lose sock making for cheap socks, but if you're going to do high-end fancy patterns, computerized designs that, we can custom make our own socks and have initials in them, or customize, Gamer 1745 logo merch actually stenciled into the sock or something like that. That would be maybe, say, made in America on a computerized machinery that, so you have a certain amount of creative destruction, and that's fine. And if it was just that. Now, and people look back, well, trade wars have got us into and this is where we're getting back to this, Great Depression and world chaos, and got Hitler into power, etc., etc., etc. And that's sort of Smoot-Hawley and all this other stuff. Yes, but there's a big but there. And what I don't know right now is the reason the trade tariffs, along with the trade war that sort of broke out, along with the depression in America that breaks out because of the stock market bubble, and I have to look up to get all the details exactly right. But basically, Germany had lost a war. Maybe you heard about this. In World War I, they lost a war. And they had crushing financial liabilities, quite justifiably so, I would say, placed on them, but they're still crushing. You can't sort of kind of do that to Austro-Hungary, because Austro-Hungary sort of gone away, though I think there may have been some of that stuff on Austria and Hungary, but I just think they sort of ignored it and whatever. So all this stuff is dumped on Germany. Well, Germany can't pay this. So what America does is loan the money to Germany to pay Britain and France. I don't know if America got much back from it, but they loan the money. And so the idea is you pay it now, and you can pay it off over 20 or 40 years or whatever. You get a long-term payment ability. So they did that. Plus, there was also reason Britain and France needed the money was to pay America back for all of the stuff America sold them. They didn't quite do the Lend-Lease situation, which was just sort of fabricated. They were more actually, governmental loans. And so Britain and France owes America lots of money. Okay, so America works out this system that has a certain amount of economic money moving around between these countries. And then combination of tariffs and the collapse in the stock market and everything else. And this collapses the system to pay back American, greedy America. Well, America, and it wasn't necessarily, it was, well, I think, if I have some of this right, it was government guaranteed loans. So the government didn't loan the money to Germany. Individuals in America loan money to Germany through the American banking system, if I have all this right. And if somebody wants to correct me in some details. But so it's, American banks, which are representatives of the individual depositor. Now, of course, there's some of the biggest depositors are things like Union, which is coming around at this time, pension funds. And so, yeah, these are like big hedge funds. You talk about capitalism. And we'll get into this. I've just thought of something else, but we'll do that some other time. Financial capitalist markets, capitalist hedge fund. Yeah, but that's just the guy who's managing 100,000 or a million or 10,000 or whatever workers' pensions funds. So it's sort of conglomerated into some major accounts, and he's getting wealthy because he is managing effectively all these individuals' money that if this goes belly up, they lose their pension funds and they can't get it back because it's just gone. So these are government guaranteed loans. So if they don't get paid back, the U.S. government, the taxpayer, is on the hook for this stuff. And so because the government then has to pay back this bad loan, to keep these pension funds and other people funded. And so they got to take that money away from, oh yeah, just the rich people. Well, yeah, no, a lot more than the rich people have to pay taxes. So there's this whole economic interbalance system based off of World War I that collapses. Now, we are in a different situation now, and America is no longer the main creditor nation. It is now the main debtor nation. I think it's China's buying a lot of it, but I do think Britain may be actually a larger purchaser of American debt. But maybe China's bigger, I don't know. But China is up in the top 2 or 3 purchasers of American government debt. And yes, it will probably collapse the dollar, and yes, it would probably be really, really bad. But this time we're looking not at somebody canceling debts to America and hurting Americans in that sense. It's America canceling its debts to other people. And even though it's maybe in China, when we say China buying it, it is in some cases, yes, it is the Chinese government, but also it's a lot of various individuals, businesses, funds that are buying American debt because they sell something in America. They get paid in this dollar. They got a nice paper dollar here, or big pallets full of them, or something, or just ones and zeros in a bank account. But that doesn't buy your lunch in Sichuan or Shenzhen or wherever in China. So they've got all this American dollars. So what are they going to do with it? Will they buy American debt that is supposed to be paying back, some sort of interest and whatnot? Don't know the interest rates at what they bought it, whatever, but because some of the interest rates went down very low. But they're buying American debt, and so with those dollars, so it makes them wealthy. If it gets canceled, if there's some sort of trade war with China, we can cancel out either all of our debt, which would be very bad, or just debt held by certain entities. And so China is on a precarious thing. So getting back to Japan. Japan is growing its industry during this time period. But because gold is still sort of the standard, also American dollars, which at this time are backed by gold and silver. I don't know if the pound is. I presume it is. The English pound is backed by gold and silver, but I don't know for a fact. Because it used to say on the money before, they sort of made gold holding, and again, it could be wrong under FDR, and they sort of take us off some of the gold stuff. But it used to be that you could go in with your money and get, like, you take a $20 bill and you go in and you get a $20 gold piece. Or if you go get, the coins were silver, actual silver, the quarters, and then, not nickels were nickel, but the dimes and the silver dollars, those were, so if you had a $100 bill, you can go get 100 silver dollars, so you have $100 in silver. That's what it all meant. And you could cash out into literally hard currency, not national currencies, but hard currency. And it wasn't pegged to, it was $1 in silver or $100 in gold or whatever it was. It wasn't necessarily pegged to the ounce, but we knew what a $20 gold piece weighed. I don't know, half an ounce, quarter ounce, not sure. Maybe it was an ounce. I don't know. Maybe it was an ounce. I don't know right offhand. But people knew what the weight was at the time, and it could be changed, but they knew what the weight was. And so this is what's going around. And Japan loses the ability to sell a lot of their manufactured goods because there's who's going to buy them. The poor farmer who can barely feed themselves are not going to buy a sewing machine, electric toaster, a radio. He doesn't even have electricity, so he's not going to be buying these things. Now the urbanite Japanese are doing some of this stuff, but I believe, and I don't know, this is why this is a belief, I believe a lot of them were living in apartments that weren't fully set up as we moderns might know. They might not have an electric toaster. They might not have much of a means of food production, because I do know that there is a massive tradition of very small food shops, or prepared food all around, and so they very well may be going and getting food almost literally downstairs in some of the major buildings and stuff, and ordering food and then taking it up to their apartment and eating it, or eating it in the I'm trying to avoid restaurants, but it's not, it's sort of quickie food stalls and whatnot. So that these modern apartments, they had electricity. They may have an electric cooker. They may have some of the cooking thing, but it may not be quite, everybody living there isn't necessarily quite financially secure enough to buy all of the amenities that a modern person would just presume you have. I'm sure some did. I just don't know how widespread, but those are limited to, though that was the big attraction, to the major cities as they're modernizing. They're going through this stuff. But where else are you going to sell your goods? Well, the Soviet Union isn't buying much of that. America is going through a Great Depression right now in 36. It doesn't have the money to buy lots of stuff. And sure, you might sell a few shiploads, and they were, of cheap Chinese or Japanese toasters or something. I'm sure there was some of that. I know my parents, they still have it, an old Seikosha, like a Seikosha clock, wind-up clock that was pre-war, and so that was sold into America as a 12-inch or larger diameter clock face that was Seikosha. And I do believe that's Seiko, like watches, but their earlier name. That was sold into America. So sure, they're actually selling some of that, but how much of that is going on? And I've mentioned earlier in this series, Japan right around this time is starting to sell some Datsuns in Australia. But again, Australia is going through this process. So how much can you grow your industry? And military orders can be a major part of it, but is only so big. It isn't going to cover everything. And governments, the way economies and command economies, and we've talked a lot about this in Germany, can work, but they will, if you have a fiat currency, meaning a currency not backed by gold or silver or some other precious metal or something. If you have that and you start, or even if you do have that, because we can look at the collapse of gold buying value and silver buying value from the Spanish conquest of the New Worlds. They sort of collapsed the European economic system for a while there, because of the you flood in huge amounts of gold, especially luxury goods. Inflation skyrockets on them, and so people who previously could afford things can't. You have that sort of situation, massive inflation, and so the Japanese are aware of this. So you can only do so much so fast, and so this is how could Japan have won? Well, I'm saying here is, even while still being Japan, they could theoretically expand their industry, and because we see post-war Japanese industry take off. So this is interesting again. Japan goes to war to protect its, or to get an empire. So because first-rate great powers, because before World War II there were no superpowers, first-rate great powers had empires. America sort of kind of does with the Philippines and Guam and Puerto Rico. But that's really immaterial, and most everyone knows that. It's mostly the American Empire is the 48 states or whatnot. Just that big of a group of regions. And so Japan needs an empire to, one, sell things to, and two, have its resources that it doesn't have internally. It can make steel so long as it imports iron and coal. It can, steel is a manufactured item. It isn't a mined item. It is manufactured. So yeah, it can manufacture all the steel at once so long as it has access to coal and iron. Well, as we see post-war, Japan takes off without an empire, and it sort of makes the idea of autarkies possibly not the worst solution, but possibly not a very good solution, and definitely not needed, because if you do something well, you do it right. Now, of course, Japan's post-war boom is fueled by its markets primarily in America, because the Americans have pent up massive amounts of money. Americans, not the government, Americans, because Americans, soldiers, well, yeah, I'm sure lots of soldiers spent their money, and they weren't paid very, very well, but they were paid. And a lot of them sent money back to family and relatives, and then a lot of other soldiers, saved their money. And then there were lots and lots of people working at home that couldn't spend their money because of rationing. And what they did do, and they were encouraged heavily to do, is buy war bonds, loaning money to the government. And of course the government incurs lots of debt for this, but then all of this stuff is now, tank factories can become tractor factories, or they mostly had gone back from being the locomotive. All but one of the locomotive factories that became tank factories went back to being locomotive factories before the end of the war, and presumably the one, I forget which one it was, that was just doing so well they kept it as being a tank factory throughout the war. It goes back to being a locomotive factory, but you switch from military aviation to civil aviation, and you're switching over so all these Americans have all this money to buy things, but they don't, again, have unlimited money, because it's not the war's over, cha-ching, let me go get my war bonds. It's going to take a while to cash them out to pay off the stuff, and so you need good, cheap goods coming in. And so that gets in. The reason I'm discounting Europe is because they were still under rationing and all kinds of problems. So it's really America and the markets in America that fuel Japan's post-war growth. So yeah, so I'm still looking at that. So a better booming economy for Japan would help Japan win the war. And that is a reasonable, possible what if things were different, and that could be a thing, and we'll talk more about that in a future episode. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for liking the videos. Please post questions, comments, suggestions, corrections. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.